Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a bucket. Ain't a bucket. Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Everything is straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next!
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah!
Rod, thank you very much for agreeing to be on the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. I know it's been a little bit of work and a little bit of time in the making to get you here, but thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to be here.
Well, Rod, a couple of things. We don't do that many interviews on this show. We do a lot of topic-based and conceptual-based sorts of shows, so our interviews are kind of few and far between. And one of the things I always tell all the listeners is when we have drummers that have been interviewed several different times in print and when they've been interviewed in different forms of media, we don't normally go back and go through like a very detailed bio. I always say everybody needs to do a little bit of drumming anthropology. Go back through and find out the different things that you want to find out about Rod. So what I do want to do, I want to get a little bit of bio for context. But what I primarily want to do is I want to jump into really when you started playing seriously. I want to talk about when you went to Nassau Community College, because there's a couple of really cool connections that you've got with some previous guests that I don't know if you're aware of, and kind of want to talk a little bit about that. But the first question I want to ask you is, I know from doing a little bit of research, you're originally a Long Island guy. And yeah, and when did you really get serious about playing from the standpoint of like, you know, I think I've got something here and I want to really start some serious study?
It was a Sunday night in February of 1964, and I, like millions of other kids and their families, were sitting around the TV set waiting for the Beatles to come on stage for the Ed Sullivan Show at 8 p.m. And it was a defining moment for me. So I was sitting with my parents and my sister. The Beatles came on. I forget if the first song they played was I Want to Hold Your Hand, or I can't remember. It was the moment that I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. That simple.
Were you already playing drums at that time?
No.
What about piano? I know that you play keyboards as well.
Yeah, my parents started me early on in what was called the Children's Cultural Workshop. They were very concerned with their children getting some culture. And so, among other things, we both were enrolled in taking basic piano lessons. I didn't really love it at the time. And it was maybe a couple of years into it that seeing the Beatles on the television show changed my life. Now, what's interesting is years later, I had a renewed interest in piano. And then actually, I'm jumping ahead, but actually when I went to the University of Miami, beginning my third year of undergraduate studies, I was actually leaning towards wanting to play piano more than drums. And so I was able to work it out down at the university to study with the jazz piano teacher while also playing drums in what really ended up being the Dixie Dregs.
Gotcha. Now, one thing that you are completely and totally unaware of is that you and I have quite a bit of common ground when it comes to some teachers, and it involves University of Miami and ultimately later University of Tennessee. And I'm gonna come back to that in just a second, because I definitely want to spend some time talking about your educational background. Now, after the Beatles, how long did it take before you got your first drums? And of course, I know you remember what your first drum set was. What was it?
Well, let's see. When my parents saw that my interest was not going away, within a few short weeks of the television show, my dad took me to Manny's Music on 48th Street in New York City, the very famous music store, and bought me a Ludwig bass drum and snare drum. And the bass drums back then had these telescoping rods that held a little cymbal. And so those two drums, the bass drum and snare drum, came with a 10-inch cymbal. So that was the beginning, and they figured they'd start me with that to see if my interest held. And then when they saw how excited I was, little by little, another piece would be added. So over the course of a year or so, I eventually had a 4-piece drum set. And this is just a funny aside. When the Dixie Dregs recently played in Phoenix, Arizona, one of my oldest friends came to the show, and we were talking about our first band. This is going back to 1965, maybe, where he played the baritone horn, which is a version of a tuba. And the two of us would play together. So it was the first power duo, I believe, in existence. And it was a little drum set with a baritone horn. And you're fairly limited in terms of the things you can play. What does a tuba usually do? It just hits the root notes of chords. So we did a lot of march songs, like When the Saints Go Marching and things like that. But it was basically boom, 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 boom.
Well, one of our cheeky listeners will end up writing some sort of a sonata for baritone and drum set now. Rod, please tell me that you still own that Ludwig bass drum. It would be great if you did.
I own the entire drum set, and several years ago, I received a beautiful gift from, I guess, someone who has been a fan for some years. He's a drummer named Terry Gwynn, and he makes one-of-a-kind pieces, like pieces of art, out of musical instruments. And so I received a floor tom that he had lined the inside with photographs and articles of me on the inside, and then put a thick piece of glass over the drum. So he turned it into a coffee table. He engraved my name in the glass, and then he lined the drum with lights. So at night you can light up the inside. And so we struck up a friendship, and then over the course of the next few years started talking about, what one-of-a-kind work of art he could maybe do for me. And for many years living in my home, I've had my first two drum sets, among other things, just stored away in cases. And about, I'd say, 20 years having not seen them, I opened up the cases. These were giant road cases that we used in the earlier days of the Dixie Dregs. They were just stacked up against the wall. I opened them up, and there were the drums, my first two drum sets, this black lacquered kit, and then also the psychedelic red finish that Ludwig had done in the 60s. The problem was all of the foam padding had disintegrated, and a lot of it had just stuck to the shells of the drums. In addition to that, the chrome had oxidized on the shells. And these 8 drums, 2 4-piece kits, really looked like garbage that should just be brought to the curb for garbage pickup. But I called Terry and asked him what he thought about maybe doing something with these drums. Did he think he could save them? And he said, you know what, Rod? If you can ship them to me out in San Francisco, I live on the other side. I'm in New York on Long Island. He said, ship those drums to me. I'll refurbish them, and then we could talk about what you'd like to do with them. I said, great. So I shipped him the drums. And then between the two of us, we came up with an idea to make like a conversational piece coffee table where he said, you know what, I'm going to figure out how we could maybe take a rack, like a Gibraltar rack, and suspend all of the drums from the rack. And then I said, yeah, and on top of that, maybe we could put a thick piece of beveled glass, like 6 feet long. And it was also his idea to line each of the drums with photographs of my drumming idols. And so, I'd say a year or so later, he called me up. He said, Rod, the masterpiece is done. I don't trust shipping it back to you. And so I'm renting a Winnebago. I'm driving across country, and we're going to put it together in your home when I get there in the next couple of weeks. And one day, this giant Winnebago showed up, and there was Terry Gwynn with these magnificent looking 8 drums that were restored to new. And took him a couple hours to assemble the whole thing, but it's in the upstairs room in my home. It's really something else to look at. So, the 2 bass drums are lined with photos of Ringo Starr and Mitch Mitchell. And then between the other drums, we have John Bonham, Ginger Baker, Charlie Watts, Keith Moon, Billy Cobham, Clive Bunker from Jethro Tull, and Tony Williams. I believe that's most of them.
That is an amazing story. I feel like, Rod, I need to do a podcast with Terry Gwynn. That guy's amazing, man.
You know what? You should. And he deserves having people know who he is. He's done pieces for other people. I don't know that he's ever done anything this extensive with anybody else, but he's done quite a few single pieces for various drummers. And then he's branched out and he does things with guitars and other musical instruments.
Sure. Well, man, fantastic story. Now, to step back a little bit back into the 60s, okay? Sometime along the way, you had to figure out, you're like, hey, this is going pretty well. I'm going to study with someone. Who was one of your first teachers?
My first teacher was a big band jazz drummer by the name of Howie Mann. Mm-hmm. I can't remember how we discovered him. Maybe it was through word of mouth. He lived in the next town over from me. Howie had played with different big bands in the 50s. And he had started a teaching practice in his home. And really, he's the person that I would have to, give credit for laying everything out for me, teaching me how to read snare drum, more difficult snare drum pieces, and playing along with big band records, Woody Herman records, Count Basie records, teaching me how to read these big band charts, and just giving me, a well-balanced drumming diet on a regular basis.
Did he use specific methods, say something like Wilcoxon or NARD or anything like that you recall?
We worked for, both of those authors, Stick Control, Ted Reed. Well, that Ted Reed was Syncopation. Mm-hmm. Worked out of that book, and of course he had me interpreting page 37 or page 38, some different ways, but always with playing along to the big band so that I would be putting them into a musical context. We worked out of one of Jim Chapin's books. Downstairs somewhere I have a pile of the books that I went through with him. And then we dabbled a little bit with some different Latin drumming styles and a little bit of rock, because he knew I was a typical American kid obsessed with rock music.
Sure. Well, it sounds like he certainly did the right thing from the standpoint. He put you through the traditional methods. He gave you the tour of the Bibles of drumming, so to speak. So he really prepared you very well. So
yes, he did. And after 4 or 5 years, it was then that I started going to Nassau Community College. And while I was at Nassau, I studied with the percussion teacher there, a man by the name of Ronnie Gould, who at the time was playing with the New York City, was it New York City, not the opera company?
I think it was the ballet.
Thank you very much. New York City Ballet. And so he got me started, seriously playing timpani and the various mallet instruments. But while I was doing that, I also studied for a year or so with another local big band drummer by the name of Al Miller, who had written several drum books, and he had me working out of his books.
Gotcha. I want to definitely come back to Ronnie Gould, because I have a very cool story to tell you about Ronnie Gould, about how I know about him. But the other thing I want to take a quick step back is, for any of our listeners who've been living under a rock, and if they don't realize that you are a left-handed drummer, when did it come to your attention, or say Howie's attention, that, hey, wait a minute, this guy doesn't need to be on a right-handed drum set. He needs to be spun around and needs to be playing on a left-handed drum set. And for me, I do quite a bit of teaching as well. To me, my determination if a kid needs to do that or a student needs to do that is it has to do more with the feet. In other words, are you more left-footed versus left-handed, so to speak? So how did you come across that discovery?
All right. So, I think like a lot of young people starting to play drums, we set up the drums based on how we see other people playing them. So, Ringo, although Ringo, I understand, is left-handed, he was playing on a right-handed setup. And so that's how I started playing. And like I said, it was maybe a year into it when I started studying with Howie Mann. And it was within the first 10 seconds of me sitting down on his drum set, which was a 4-piece right-handed kit, that he recognized that I was favoring my left side. I was holding the sticks in a traditional format, but as a right-handed player, because that's how they taught the 4 of us in the 5th grade when we started playing drums, and we got our big fat 3S marching sticks and drum pads. So he noticed that when I just played a drum fill, I would crash with my left hand instead of my right. Mm-hmm. And he said, "You're left-handed, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Okay, we are going to turn you around so you will play completely the opposite way." This was, I'm guessing, 1966 maybe, and or 65, and that open-handed style of playing had not really come to the forefront yet. People like Billy Cobham, Simon Phillips, and others, we hadn't seen that yet. And so he did what he thought was the right thing to do, which was just to turn the drum set around and have me play left-handed.
Gotcha. Did he also have you turn your grip around, where you were playing, say, like a left-handed traditional grip, or did you go to matched grip at that time?
Left-handed tradition.
Gotcha. Now, I want to go ahead and jump forward a little bit to back where we were talking about Ronnie Gould up at Nassau Community College. Rod, while I was preparing to do this interview with you, I went back and looked through some different print articles and whatnot. And I noticed in an old interview you did with Modern Drummer, man, almost 40 years ago when you were with the Dregs, that you had mentioned Ronnie in there. And then there was also an allusion or a little bit of a side later into the interview where you had talked about seeing Tom Brechtlein playing with Chick Corea. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Tom's a friend of mine. He's been on the show a couple times before. Wonderful guy. And he also studied with Ronnie Gould at Nassau Community College before he went to Hofstra. And he cannot sing the praises enough of what Ronnie Gould did for him. So I hope that I mean, I don't know if Ronnie's still alive or not. But I hope he certainly realized that he had a couple of great students and that you guys have that connection. And I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
You know, I might have known that, but it slipped my mind for years. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Tom is an amazing drummer, and I still remember seeing that show. It was shortly after I had graduated from the University of Miami, and you know, the Dixie Dregs decided, all for one for all, let's go for it, let's try to make it. And we ultimately moved back to where Steve Morse and Andy West were living, which was Augusta, Georgia. And occasionally some of us would drive a couple of hours into Atlanta to see concerts. And so one of them was to go see this concert with Tom playing with Chick Corea. And, you know, I didn't have much facility with Latin drumming. And I just remember when they started playing this tune and Tom started playing what I ultimately learned to be a bayou groove, where the bass drum is going, you know, do, 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 do. And his ride pattern was just a straightened out jazz ride pattern, you know, ding, 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 ding. But it was what his left hand was doing on the snare that blew me away. It was this pattern that goes mind blowing. I had never heard that before, but I was able to register it in my mind so that I could, you know, get to my drums and start to work it out. And it's funny, just to finish the point. So that was, you know, somewhere in the mid 70s, and then fast forward about a little over 20 years later, where I got hired to start teaching at Berklee College of Music. And, you know, part of the curriculum for private drum set is that each semester you have a list of things that you have to demonstrate in the last week of classes when you have your final performance exam. And bayou, there was that term. It was like, all right, so for third semester students, you have to make sure that they have some facility with this handful of Latin drum grooves, and bayou was one of them. Not that specific pattern that Tom was playing, although it's a perfectly acceptable one, but that groove and that pattern was in the handful of bayou grooves that you could teach.
Very cool. Tommy is hands down one of the most underrated drummers on the face of the planet. He is absolutely one of my favorites, and sounds like you have some similar thoughts about him. He's just a wonderful guy too. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. Rod, now after you spent some time with Ronnie at Nassau Community College, you did, as you previously mentioned, end up going to the University of Miami. And this is where you and I have a connection. While you were down there, one of the guys that helped start that program was a gentleman named Jerry Coker. And Jerry Coker, he helped start the University of Miami program, and then he eventually ended up moving to Tennessee, where I ended up studying with him at the University of Tennessee in the late 80s. So just a quick question before we jump into some more information about Miami. Did you have any interaction with Jerry while you were there?
No, I believe I came in right as he was leaving.
Gotcha.
Because I came in the fall of 73.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall him being there, but I do recall his presence being everywhere, and his name was spoken often.
Legendary. Yeah, absolutely legendary educator, and just really a groundbreaking educator when it comes to developing the studio music and jazz curricula. Just a tremendous guy. Now, while you were down at Miami, I think a lot of people are probably aware that was, we'll call it a very fertile period for that school. At that time, did you have any interaction with either Pat Metheny, Jaco Pastorius, Gottlieb, Bruce Hornsby, any of those guys?
Yeah, Danny and I became very friendly. I can't remember how it happened, but we're in touch to this day. We were born one day apart. He's a day older than I am. And so on our birthdays, we contact each other. We've done it almost every single year for these past 40 some odd years. So I remember growing up in my town of Plainview, Long Island, New York. In my high school, there were 4 drummers. And I guess I was one of the better drummers of the 4 of us. And so, I felt pretty good about my playing. And I always had bands that would play the Battle of the Bands in our town. And, for what it was, we'd get our little bit of notoriety. So same thing, at Nassau Community College, of the guys that played drum set there, I guess I could say I was one of the better drum set players. I remember getting down to Miami and walking around the campus a couple of days before classes started. And I went over to the main music building, the Foster building, and was just walking through the halls, taking it all in. But I heard some music coming from what turned out to be, the big room where every Friday there would be some sort of presentation going on for all of the studio music and jazz students. And so I went up to the room and peered in, and I had the most overwhelming reaction because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had always thought that from, say, high school and college to then being in the big leagues of the music business, you would go through some sort of transition period where you'd go from a good musician to a great musician. But I was looking at these 4 musicians who were jamming, and I was so overtaken by how amazing they sound, and I couldn't understand. These are college students. How can they already be sounding like people who are in the big leagues? Well, I didn't know who any of these musicians were, but as it turned out, it was Pat Metheny on guitar, Mark Egan, the original bass player of the Metheny group, on bass, Cliff Carter, who was the original Metheny group keyboardist, and the drummer was not Danny Gottlieb. It was someone whose name escapes me, But what I couldn't take my eyes off of was the fact that he had two hi-hats set up next to each other. And, with his toe, he would be chicking the main hi-hat. But then on occasion, with the heel of his left foot, he'd be making the chick sound with the second hi-hat. So he could get like a thing going, or open close sounds with the toe and heel. So that experience never left me. And then classes began a couple of days later, and then it was apparent that these guys were not the only monstrous musicians at the college. And so it was this eye-opening experience where I realized, oh my goodness, I have so much to start getting together fast.
But I think that is an incredibly valuable thing to have that sort of, I don't know if you'd call it imposter syndrome, or at least that, wait a minute, hang on, I've got to get myself together, because there are a lot of students that don't feel that way. There's a lot of, I would call it youthful hubris sometimes that comes into that, to where it's like, I've kind of got what I've got, and I'm here to show everybody what I've got. So I think that's a valuable trait to have. I sort of had that exact same experience too when I went to school, that I felt like I was way behind. So, Rod, who was the percussion instructor there at Miami?
Well, let's see. The man who headed up the percussion department was Fred Wickstrom. Mm-hmm. He was a wonderful percussionist, and he was playing with the Miami Symphony. And this is terrible. Like Harry Hawthorne was the drum set instructor. I never studied with Harry because, as I had said earlier, when I had gotten to the university, my interest was more in piano. And they let me study with Vince Lawrence, who was the jazz piano teacher. And then I was also taking jazz keyboard harmony classes with a sax player by the name of Dan Bonsanti. And between those classes, the jazz keyboard harmony, where there were a handful of guys in the class playing on Wurlitzer electric pianos, and studying privately with Vince Lawrence, my world was turned upside down. Believe it or not, I had thought that in jazz, say like with bebop playing, when you play the head of the song, where the melodies of the song, and then go into trading solos, I thought the solo part of bebop music was basically a free-for-all, where you just sort of know the cool notes to hit. So when a piano player is just going, I thought there was really no thought behind it. You just do anything. I had no idea that the soloing is happening over the changes to the head of the song. And, to kind of illustrate how ignorant I was back then, when I took my very first private lesson, Vince, the piano teacher, he said, why are you hitting the note C with your right hand in the chord? And I said, well, because it's a C chord. And he said, yeah, but the bass player is hitting the C. You, as the piano player, you hit the cool notes. You define the tonality of the particular chord with the third and the seventh, which happen to be a tritone when it's a dominant seventh, and on and on and on. My head was exploding, like a 1-year-old child or a nine-month-old child that stands for the first time and then takes its first step. That's what it was like playing piano, and I absorbed so much knowledge in the 2 years of studying with Vince and taking those keyboard classes. Amazing.
How did you like the other classwork that's involved in being a music major, such as theory and ear training, orchestration, instrumentation, improvisation, that sort of thing?
I enjoyed most of it immensely. Couple of things I just could not figure out. Some of the more classical oriented classes like counterpoint and form and analysis, those were not so easy for me. But all of the classes that were geared towards the jazz harmonic concepts were the ones that I loved. I couldn't get enough of them.
Now, form and analysis is not easy for anyone, really, so you're in pretty good company with the rest of the general music education population there with that. Rod, did you end up graduating from Miami?
Yeah.
So you did. You got your bachelor's down there, and so what I want to do now is let's start talking about professional life. And again, I want to do something a little bit different. What I want to do is I want to take a few of the different groups that you are associated with, and I want to do like a little bit of a compare and contrast. And again, listeners, if you want to find out more about these different groups, there's plenty out there. But we're going to do something just a tad bit different. And so, Rod, what I want to do is I want to take the Dixie Dregs, Winger, and Jazz is Dead. And let's kind of talk about them all together with some comparing and some contrasting, okay? And the first thing I want to ask you, and this is going to be on the business side of things, not necessarily on the performance side. Are you a full member of all those different groups, or are you a sideman in any of them?
I'm a full member of the Dixie Dregs and Winger. Nobody was a member of Jazz is Dead. It was a concept thought up by a businessman who was a booking agent, and he contacted various musicians to see if they'd be interested in playing in the band. So everybody in Jazz is Dead was, I guess, technically a sideman. So I guess from the very beginning, everybody cut their own deal. Now, I was not the original drummer in the band. It was Billy Cobham. And then when he had left sometime later, maybe a year or two after it was put together, I started sharing the drum chair with an amazing jazz drummer by the name of Jeff Sipe. And I would play a handful of shows, then I'd fly home, then Jeff would come out and do some shows. And then in the summer of the year that he and I had started doing it, we decided to do it as a double drumming band, just like the Grateful Dead. And then he eventually left the group, and then I became the drummer. And then some years later, we double drummed again. But Jazz is Dead is sort of, the concept was like a revolving door of jazz fusion musicians coming and going, but all playing the music of the Grateful Dead, not sounding anything like the Grateful Dead, just doing their own take on it. But it was not a band that was put together by the musicians as members.
Gotcha. One quick shout out to our local homeboy, fan and friend of the show, Jeff Sipe, aka Apartment Q258. We got, Jeff just lives a few miles from here. Well, he lives up in like Brevard right now, but we've got to get him on the show. He's been spoken about several times, and I know him, but I got to get him on the show sometime. So thanks for bringing him up.
Oh, sure. And in fact, I have to mention, when we did the double drumming thing, Jeff is very big into Indian drumming. And so, he gave me some quick lessons in it so we could then work out a double drum solo together. So that was so much fun to do with him. He's quite knowledgeable.
Absolutely. Another very underrated drummer as well. So now getting back to the business side of what we were talking about the different groups you're members of versus being a sideman. Okay. I think it'd be interesting for the listeners to find out what are the natural pros of being a member of, say, like the Dixie Dregs or Winger as opposed to being a sideman. And then the obvious thing is most likely going to be, okay, well, there's going to be better pay on that. You maybe get a cut of the merchandising, that sort of thing. Tell us what your feelings are about that.
Well, it's not so cut and dry, because when you're a member of a band, if it's a band that's starting out, you are going to suffer with the rest of the other members because there's very little at the end of the day to divide up. When you are a sideman, you at times can do better than the members of a band. Mm-hmm. That's the reality. So sure, of course, when things are up and running and a band is drawing nice sized crowds, then as a member, you will do very well. But, the Dixie Dregs went from being college students to a band deciding to go for it. And, what that meant was everybody cramming into one vehicle, hitching the trailer to the back of the vehicle, moving your gear into the trailer, and then driving 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 miles to get to the next place that you're going to play, and then unloading the trailer, humping your gear upstairs to, and set up all day. This is what being the member of a band was like in the early days of the Dixie Dregs. I would have much preferred to have said, hey guys, I don't really care to be part of things. If the going gets good, I need to make X amount of money per week or I'm not interested. So there's an example where being a member of a band might not be the greatest way to go. When you're a sideman, if you can get into that group of musicians that are in demand and and find work, you will always be doing very, very well. The thing is, you will never be able to say whether this is important or not to you, that you were actually part of, the creative process of making the music and turning this idea that was just in everybody's heads into this real bona fide breathing animal,
Sure.
that is taking its music to the people. I always wanted to be a member of my bands. I enjoyed the camaraderie and of being part of something that believed so strongly in what it was doing, and really had that conviction and that feeling that something good would eventually come. So it's not only the Dixie Dregs and Winger that I'm a member of, because I was there from nearly day one with these things, but also with the Jelly Jam, the project that I have with John Mayung from Dream Theater and Ty Tabor from King's X, and then also the Rudis Morgenstein project, which is a duo that I have with keyboardist Jordan Rudis, who's also in Dream Theater now. So really the only band that I've not been a member of is Jazz is Dead. But I have to say, it is of the most exciting playing I've ever had the pleasure of doing in my entire career. The concept of Jazz is Dead is different than anything I have ever done, because it's a mostly jamming conception. So you play a little bit of the Grateful Dead song, and then when when you leave that and go into the jamming aspects of it, it's different from night to night. You make it up as you go along, and you take chances. Taking chances is welcomed by the band, as it is by the jam band audience. The concept is the complete antithesis of having a set list that you play exactly the same way night after night. In the jam band world, you don't play the same songs in the same order ever. You constantly change it up, and then you change the jamming in each specific song from night to night. And so I remember flying out to San Diego to play my first show with them back in, it might have been 1999 or 2000. I was terrified. I was also terrified knowing that I would be sharing the stage with Alphonso Johnson, you know, the world famous bass player, who I used to go see around the same time that I saw Tom Brechtlein playing with Chick Corea. I saw Alphonso playing in Weather Report and the George Duke Billy Cobham Band. So here I was flying out to play this music that, I mean, I was a little unsure about, because, you know, I mean, I have my background in jazz or big band playing, but I'd never done it live in front of an audience in such a manner where, you know, you might play one song for 15 minutes and just see where it takes you. So it was going to be that combined with playing with Alphonso Johnson. And then Jimmy Herring was the guitarist in the band at the time. And the only person who I really knew was T Lavitz, who was the keyboard player in the Dixie Dregs for all those years. And so T was the keyboard player in Jazz is Dead. But it turned out to be one of the most musically, creatively rewarding playing experiences of my life.
Rod, while we're on the Jazz is Dead topic, when Cobham departed that group, was it T Lavitz that recommended you for the gig?
Yeah, I think so. And T was really instrumental in putting the whole thing together. He was contacted by the guy who came up with the concept of it, a man by the name of Michael Gaiman. And, you know, T started throwing out names of who he thought might be good. But in the very beginning, it was Michael Gaiman's idea to get Billy Cobham and Alphonso Johnson in the band.
Gotcha. Is that group, I know that it's put together and run by a booking agent. Is it still what you would call active? In other words, is it still kind of a viable entity, or is it pretty much on hiatus?
It's on hiatus. We did a handful of shows in the summer of, I think it was 2005, because it was the 50-year anniversary of the Grateful Dead. And so Michael Gaiman thought it would be cool for the band to be out touring. And so he put together a package with Jazz is Dead and Jefferson Starship, which it was also the 50-year anniversary of Jefferson Airplane. And it also included a third band, because it was the 50-year anniversary of them also. It's on the tip of my tongue. Another San Francisco band. And so we did maybe 20 shows. It was a lot of fun.
Gotcha. Now, I want to step back a little bit because I don't want to leave Winger out of this equation when we're talking. And what I want to do is I kind of want to lead into it a little bit with, we'll kind of call it a post-early incarnation of the Dixie Dregs when you were working with Steve Morse when he had his own group together. And I'm doing this completely and totally for personal, selfish reasons. My first introduction, the first time I ever heard you play, Rod, was on the album, The Introduction. And it was, the first time I heard you was on that infamous double bass shuffle on Cruise Missile. I'll never forget it. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because it's going to lead me into your tenure with Winger, but the other thing I want to bring up is another recurring topic on this show has been this little celebrated record label that has some of the finest fusion and jazz recordings that it really goes unheralded, and that's the Electra Musician label. And that's the label that the Introduction by Steve Morse Band was on. It's also a label that we're going to throw back to Tom Brechtlein. One of the great unsung Chick Corea albums, Again and Again, is on that label. You've also got the Griffith Park Collection, Echoes of an Era. There's a whole bunch of different, just wonderful recordings on that label that just, it really gets kind of swept under the carpet a little bit. But I just wanted, again, for purely selfish reasons, to bring that up. Because it seems like, man, that once you got going with the Dixie Dregs, you've been one of those guys that just continues to work. You went from the Dixie Dregs to the Steve Morse Band. You had some tremendous success in both of those. And then it kind of worked itself into the mid to late 80s. You got involved with Winger. Now, where I want to go with this is Greg Bissonette told me one time that he had always had a dream of doing like an arena rock style band. And prior to getting into David Lee Roth, he had been touring and been doing work with Maynard Ferguson. So I sometimes feel like that you guys have a little bit of a parallel sort of a career track, that you guys were both in these jazz/fusion-y style groups. Did you have that same sort of mindset as far as like when Winger came around? It's like, man, I've always wanted to be in like an arena rock style group.
Of course. I mean, that's how it all started.
Yeah.
You know, seeing the Beatles, and then, you know, everything that followed from the Beatles really was Cream and Jimi Hendrix, then Jethro Tull, Led Zeppelin, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes. So it was rock. And then the Mahavishnu Orchestra, you know, came on the scene, and that sort of brought me a little bit in another direction into the fusion world. And that's when I discovered Miles Davis around the Bitches Brew period. And then I went back, and then that brought me to the bebop era. But so after 11 years from the day I'd gotten out of college of doing the Dixie Dregs and then the Steve Morse Band, it really was the first time that I was faced, you know, with a career dilemma where I didn't have a band. Steve Morse had been asked to join the group Kansas that was reforming. And so until further notice, I was bandless, and everything that I did was based on being in a band. I had not kind of branched out and offered my services as a recording musician or a sideman. I really wasn't doing any kind of significant teaching. So without a band, like, the income stream stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this is not anything foreign to many musicians. You know, this is like what being a musician is like. And so my wife Michelle and I had been living in Atlanta, Georgia when everything stopped. And so I moved up to New York, leaving Michelle in Atlanta just to go to New York to test the waters to see, you know, what might be up there. And after a couple of months of being up there, that she moved up to New York, and we ended up living there for about 5 years. And you know, I had a lot of interesting experiences in that first year of moving to New York. I wasn't in a great frame of mind because, you know, here I was in need of the next thing relatively quickly. And so as things seem to happen quite often as a musician, opportunities show themselves not necessarily when you're looking for them. This turned out to be a chance meeting. I had gone to the offices of a Japanese management company to talk about doing a 5-week tour with a new age artist. This is 1986 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
the new age artist was a man by the name of Kitaro. And I didn't know anything about new age music except that I thought it was very sleepy and, some of it very nice sounding, but ultimately, as a musician playing it, very boring. It was more music for the wine and cheese set, as I thought about it. But I needed the work. So through a series of events that happened, I found myself in the offices of this management company. But when I sat down to talk with the head of it, he said, look, I feel really badly. We just got a call that Kitaro has flown from Japan to LA, and he's decided to use all LA-based musicians. He's not even coming to New York, so the tour is not available. I said, okay, thank you very much. Just, you have my number. If any other things come up, please give me a call. So, he was leading me to the door to the office to say goodbye, to let me out. And just before we got to the door, I heard some rock music coming from some other room in the office. And he saw, that I was listening to it. And he said, hey, you know what? We have a couple of guys here who are doing demos, on an 8-track machine that we have here. Here, let me introduce you to them. So he opens the door, and there is Kip Winger and Reb Beach. Just, working on, well, I know what the song is. I remember it specifically. It's the song Madeleine that, a year or so later was the first single from the first Winger record. Mm-hmm. So we were introduced, and it was a very funny scenario because you have to understand, here I am, an out-of-work musician looking for the next thing to do. Reb Beach can't even look at me because he's so excited because the Dixie Dregs and Steve Morse are, the band and guitarist that at one time some years earlier had turned his life upside down, kind of like life-changing for him. And Kip Winger had no idea who I was. So, Kip said, look at Rev. He's like freaking out. And I don't know who you are. Hi, I'm Kip. Nice to meet you. And so I said, look, I'm looking for the next thing to do. And I've been in the fusion world for over a decade, but I'm really looking to get back to my rock roots. And you guys sound like that's exactly what you're doing and what I would love to do. And now Reb is going, we're not worthy. You would hate this music. It's so stupid compared to what you do. So Kip said, look, there's a list of 20 some odd drummers in New York that go to every cattle call audition. But based on how excited Reb appears to be, do you want to get together this week and jam? So I said, sure. So that's what happened. They auditioned me. And, based on a lot of the experiences I had had in the year that I was living in New York, jamming with rock musicians, I came to realize that not everybody loves polyrhythms and playing over the bar line from the get-go. And, I kind of had an immature attitude towards just laying down basic grooves, which turned around in this year of jamming with the various rock musicians that were trying to educate me that, for the most part, what people are looking for in a drummer is someone who could just lay down a nice, hard-hitting, basic groove that we've heard a million times before. But when you play it, you have to play it with such conviction and excitement that it's almost like it's being heard for the first time. So I had this year of getting hit with that quite a bit, so that when I walked into the Winger audition, and the first thing Kip Winger did on the bass was just pump eighth notes going zhong, dong, 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 dong. I played the most basic pattern a drummer could play. Bass drum on 1, snare on 2, bass drum on 3, snare on floor. with either a sloshy quarter note or eighth note hi-hat pattern. And I just hit the drums as hard as I could and didn't do anything differently. And then Kip stopped and I looked up and went, "What's up?" And he said, "Great, you're hitting the drums hard. It sounds great playing, this basic groove. But Reb told me you could do crazy stuff," which I was very funny, being that, they were a rock band. I said, "Why are you interested in that?" He said, "Well, the reason you are here is because what I'm looking for is a drummer who can hit hard and play the basic things, that rock drummers play, but I'm looking for ways that Winger can be different from all of the other bands that we're going to be lumped in with. And if we could have a drummer who can do crazy things with the time on occasion, I think it would be fantastic. So now I want you to lose me." And he went back to his pumping, and then I just started doing all of the things that, jazz rock fusion drummers do. And it was great. I couldn't lose him because, Kip Winger is a consummate musician. I mean, he has a whole career in the classical music world now. He was just nominated last year for Best Classical Album in the Grammys. So like he's the real deal. But so it was the fact that I showed him that I could lay down a basic groove, make it feel good, but also do some of the more over-the-top things that jazz and fusion drummers are known for that got me in Winger.
You just taught me something, Rod. I actually did not know that Winger was a New York-based band. During that time, it seemed like everything was so heavily West Coast based, but you guys were a New York-based band. And again, a little bit of a running theme that we've had on this show for a long time. And this is not at all to disparage any of the drummers or musicians on the West Coast, but it certainly seems like that if you look at a lot of bands that were based out of the East Coast, we'll say New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and compare it to a lot of the bands that are based out on the West Coast, the term I like to use is it seems like those bands that were based on the East Coast had a certain type of musical depth that sometimes wasn't quite as prevalent on the West Coast bands. And I think with Winger in particular, you guys were known to musicians as like, okay, yeah, here's the hard rock band, but these guys have some serious chops. It sounds like that both Kip and Reb, that was in their mind from the get-go. That, look, we're going to rock it out. We're going to be a hard rock band that kind of fits within that genre, but we're going to add an extra layer of musical depth. That's exactly what it sounds like was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, unfortunately, hindsight is 20/20, and one song came back to haunt the band, which was the song 17. Mm-hmm. It was the song that really put the band on the map and sent that first album soaring past platinum, which at the time was 1 million units. I don't know if they've changed that because records don't sell like they used to. But, it was a song. We all knew the lyrics were corny and silly. The music is very challenging to that song. But the thing was, and the thing is, whenever musicians have the dream of getting a record deal and making it, you can't, unless you're the group Rush, because it's hard for me to think of, I can't even think of 5 bands that said, okay, here's our music, take it or leave it, we're going to make it big. There's an element to the process where musicians have to play the game, look at the charts, see the bands, and listen to the music that seems to be striking a chord with the listening public, and then somehow, without sacrificing your integrity, try to craft your music with some of the elements of the music of the day. so that you can maybe be considered one of those bands and make it into the pack. And so, with bands like Kiss and Poison and Def Leppard and Cinderella topping the charts back then, when Kip and Reb were crafting the music, they would listen to all of these other bands and try to pick out the parts of those bands' music that excited them, and say, okay, so like, how can we craft our songs so at least people will speak of us in the same breath of those other bands, but let's also try to bring some other elements to our music that we think would be really, really cool. So like in my case, having a drummer who could maybe do things that would not be something that you would typically hear a rock drummer do. And so case in point, when we recorded the drums for 17, there's that part at the end of the guitar solo where there's 4 measures of an instrumental riff. And Kip and the producer, they said, okay, Rod, here we go. In those 4 measures, is there something that you could do that you would never hear on a rock record? And that's where I decided to displace the groove, where I shifted it by an 8th note. So instead of going pa, 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 I went pa, 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 pa. So for 2 measures, I displaced the groove. And I didn't think they were going to like it, but they were hysterical laughing. They fell off their chairs and they were on the floor in the control room, and they loved it. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of musicians would ask me about that little section of the song. When we were out on tour, no one had ever heard anything like that. They thought it was in odd time. It was not. It's just taking a 4/4 groove and shifting it over. And so I was really taken aback in a good way and flattered by the fact that so many fans were picking up on the fact that something different was happening in these 3 seconds or 5 seconds of music. And so I would rattle off the names of drummers. I'd say, look, it's a very simple technique. It's called groove displacement. And, if you listen to some of the music that drummers like Steve Smith and Simon Phillips and Terry Bozzio and Vinnie Colaiuta and Tom Brechtlein and guys like that do, you will hear it in various pieces of music that they're playing. And there was not one musician among hundreds and hundreds that ever heard of any of the drummers that I just mentioned, because we're talking about the rock music spectrum. Mm-hmm. And most musicians or most people that are into that don't even know that this other world of Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, they don't know any of that. They don't know that it exists. And, so the only fusion musician that these musicians in the rock realm ever heard of were like Neil Peart. Neil is not really a fusion musician. It's like a progressive rock musician. And they know him from Rush because they were a household name. They've always been a household name, at least for the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, well, Rod, I want to go ahead and jump ahead a little bit to your work at Berklee. What year did you end up being hired on faculty there, and how did that opportunity arise?
All right, so going back to how I said things don't always happen as planned, or opportunities don't really present themselves when you're, looking for them. I never sought out a teaching position at Berklee. in the summer of 1997, Jordan Rudess and I, as the Rudess Morgenstein Project, did a concert up at Berklee for their 5-week summer program. And after the concert, I received a phone call from the chairman of the percussion department, a man by the name of Dean Anderson, was the chairman at the time. And he said, "Hey, I heard the concert went great. Have you ever thought about teaching on a collegiate level?" So I said, "I don't think I've ever thought about teaching on a collegiate level. What do you have in mind?" And he said, "One of our faculty members is going on a sabbatical, and I need to fill the position. I need to fill it at least for this upcoming fall 1997 semester." And, as is always the case when a teacher retires or goes on a sabbatical, we receive boatloads of applications from people that would love to fill the position, because everybody wants to teach at a college like Berklee. But he said, "You're fresh in my mind, and you're a well-known drummer, and the position's yours if you'd like it." So I thought about it, and I didn't have anything in particular happening at the time in terms of long tours. So I decided to check it out for a semester, and here we are speaking, and to date, I've done exactly 20 years at Berklee.
So, Rod, when you got hired on that first semester, were you there to teach applied lessons, or were you there to teach classes, or were you there to teach ensembles, or a combination of those?
Right. Well, I basically remember Dean saying, teach the Rod Morgenstein style of drumming. I chose to mostly do one-on-one private lessons because it makes it much easier when you need to make up classes to meet one-on-one with someone, as opposed to having to find a day and a time that 5 or 10 or 20 people can come to. And so, if I had 10 hours of classes with 10 students in each class, it would have made it virtually impossible for me to miss weeks where I would go out on tour. So I always chose, through all of these years, to mostly do private lessons and teach a double bass lab.
Gotcha. Now, you just mentioned about going out on tours and taking gigs and missing lessons from time to time. Overall, even to this day, how many hours or days a week do you teach up there?
It typically has been 14 to 15 hours in a 2-day period. Plus, I live about 240 miles college, and so there's a really lengthy commute involved on both ends. But I've somehow managed to do it in like a 2.5 day period. It's insane, because the second day would start at like waking up at 6:30 or 7 a.m., then fighting the Boston rush hour traffic, then being in a classroom for 7 or 8 hours, and then being back in my car for 5 hours to get home at midnight or 1 a.m. Wednesday nights. It's just like a mental space that you have to put yourself in to get done.
Sure. In your personal applied private lessons with students, what kind of methods do you use? Are there particular methods, or I know you have your own books as well. What do you like to use?
Yeah, well, I have students working out of my 2 drum books. One is called Drum Set Warm-Ups. I think it's the first and only warm-up book of its kind, which came about as a result of years of making up bizarre motions around the drum set to help one or another problem that I was having. And 10 years into amassing scraps of paper with these bizarre exercises, because they're not beats and fills, they're like the drum set equivalent of scales and arpeggios. I was sitting at my drum pad one day, quote unquote, warming up to that on the pad, looking at my drum set that was 3 feet away from me, and just had this moment of realization that I don't play a drum pad, I play the drum set. And how does just moving your hands back and forth in this one position prepare you for lunging for drums and cymbals in every direction, not to mention your feet. And it was this moment, realizing like every musical instrument has countless books that are filled with scales and arpeggios, warm-up exercises, and the drum world, specifically drum set, has none, not one. And so I set out to write the world's first drum set warm-up book, which I think it's the smart thing to do. I'm not discounting the importance of, working on the fingers, hands, and wrists on a drum pad, but when you sit down at your drum set, the first thing you do should not just be what I did for years, which is just go into, my go-to beat. That's what drummers do. But why not first spend a few minutes doing some, quote unquote, scales and arpeggios around the drums, like really weird things that kind of activate all of the different muscle groups that will help inch your technique along over time, just like all of the exercises in piano books and saxophone books do for those players. So that's one book I have my students working at. And then the other book is The Drum Set Musician, which, funny enough, just before we started Skyping here today, an advanced copy of the 20-year or however many years it's been out, the updated new edition, second edition of Drum Set Musician, just arrived at my house. I was just thumbing through it. I can't wait to get back to it, to check it out, because Rick Mattingly and I wrote it back in it took years. It came out in 1997, and we decided to spruce it up, adding a bunch more pages and more play-along tracks, that songs that I wrote and recorded. So that's the other book that I work on with students. The thing is, I like to bring my 40 years of being, a professional recording and touring musician to the teaching experience. So rather than have a student work out a book. Okay, next week, let's go on to the next page, book. It's more an individualized lesson plan based on, the individual nature of each student, the things that I see in their playing that they could work on, and then finding out what their interests are and what they're passionate about. And, over the years, in addition to the instructional materials like in books and videos that I've done, I've also written, probably 200 or more articles for Modern Drummer magazine and some other drum magazines around the world. So I have so much material in terms of handouts that I pass on to the students. Plus, new things are popping up all the time. And then we also, there are multiple drum sets in my office, and so a lesson might involve my jamming with the student and trading fills or demonstrating one thing or another for them to then mimic.
Gotcha. Rod, I think it's important for prospective students who listen to this show that might be wanting to come up to Berklee, why don't you tell them what kind of a process does it take for them to get to a point to where they can enroll in school and then study with you? Because I think sometimes there's a bit of a misconception that kids think, okay, hey, I'm going to go to Berklee, so I'm immediately going to study with Kenwood Denard, and I'm immediately going to go study with Rod Morgenstein. It's not quite that simple, because there are hundreds of freshmen from all over the world that come in every year and decide they're going to be percussion majors. What are sort of the steps for them to get to the point to where they can study with you?
Well, okay, first, I have to mention that I just recently gave word that I'm retiring from teaching up there.
Okay.
You know, I did the 20 years. It's been an incredible experience, and just for various reasons, I decided that it's time to kind of close up shop there and move on to some other things. But basically, I think the department has probably somewhere between 500 and 600 drum set players, and typically each semester there's probably a new group of 100 or 150 freshmen coming in. There are probably between 30 and 40 drum set instructors in the department, and it's really a first come, first serve process by which students get to choose who they study with, and it all happens in pre-registration, which typically happens in the prior semester. And so, I always had somewhere between 20 and 25 students. And like I said, it's when the registration is happening, the further up in line that you are, the better chance you'll have of getting the teachers that you want to study privately with.
Gotcha. Now, if you could give prospective Berklee students some advice on what they need to prepare, and I mean everything from what they need to know regarding methods, regarding technique, what would you tell prospective students that they need to have together before they even think about coming to Boston?
Well, let's see. I would say try to have your basics down. Know the 26 rudiments by heart. Get your snare drum, your concert snare drum reading to a decent level. And also try to have your drum set reading fairly together. In addition to having a general understanding of reading drum charts.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, there's so many amazing things going on at the college and so much to absorb. And I always felt bad for the student that was a poor reader, because they were having to spend so much of this valuable time that could be spent doing any number of amazing things. They would have to spend their time just sitting with a basic snare drum piece, trying to figure out the difference between quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, sixteenths, sextuplets. And, the more you have those things under your belt, the easier job you're going to have with all the classes you're going to be taking. Also, most of the performance classes that you take involve reading on some level, whether it's a snare drum reading class or a chart reading class or playing in various ensembles. The stronger your reading is, the more fun you're going to have and not be bogged down in just having to slog your way through making sense of these charts or, various pages of snare drum or drum set musical notation.
Excellent advice. I've sent a few different students of mine. They've gone to Berklee up there as well. And it's another point that I would like to make on it is I don't think it's any surprise to anyone because everyone knows how much tuition costs at school. But of course, when you're talking about Berklee, you're also talking about almost Harvard style tuitions. And one of the things I just tell students is like, look, you want me to help you get ready to go study up at Berklee, but you can't even play flam paradiddles. Why in the world would you want to go up there and spend $30,000 a semester to have Kenwood Denard show you how to play pataflaflas? I mean, it's ridiculous. You need to have that under your hands before you get up there because you want to have Rod Morgenstein show you how to play double bass, not how to play stinking, paradiddle diddles. So that's great, Rod. Thank you.
Yes. Now, there are a couple things I want to mention. One thing that I will be continuing with is to teach the rock drums course that is part of Berklee's online division. They have a constantly growing online music division with probably 100 courses that can be taken as 3-credit college courses, or if you just want to take the course to get a certificate or whatever, you could do that as well. And so their online courses run 12 weeks, 4 times a year. And since I created the course about 8 years ago, I have been the teacher and facilitator of that course. As we speak, I'm still doing it, and it's one of my proudest achievements. It's also the single thing that I put more time into than anything I've ever done, creating this course, because it's not a course that just focuses on the bands that I grew up with. I mean, I could have done a drum course just on John Bonham, but it spans, the history of rock from a little bit from the 50s, but a lot in the 60s, all the way up to today. And I tried to really drive home the concepts and ideas and techniques by using transcribed 2 and 4 or 8 measure examples from 300 some odd songs, spanning the 50 years of rock. And I had to sift through about 10,000, snippets on iTunes to find the perfect examples. And then there's also hours upon hours of video instruction, as well as lots of copy of things to read. And then there are play-along tracks that you perform along with as part of the assignments and discussion questions. It was the most elaborate undertaking I've ever been part of. But when it finally was completed and it went live, it was very exhilarating for me.
It was even more elaborate than writing print books, because I know that's quite a process as well.
Yeah, right. That's my point. I've been through the process, the long-winded process of, all right, having the idea, I want to write a drum book. Okay, let's see. Let me come up with a concept. All right, now let me start fleshing it out. And, by the time you come up with your 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever page book, and you get your copy in the mail, it's an incredibly long, tedious process. The online course, for me, was like writing a book such as that. That's the copy part of it. But then shooting probably 10 hours of video highlighting certain parts of the book, then having to proof watch the video to make sure that every single thing that I demonstrated is matching up with the music that is up on screen. and then searching, like I said, through 10,000 songs to find 300 perfect examples, but then having to transcribe that particular section, and then have it sync up with the video that you're watching of me playing it, both at tempo but also slow down. And if you think it's easy to play ants marching, or Buford or Beaufort, with Matthews Band, and play that slowly as well as at tempo, you have another thing coming. It was so much time commitment to put this whole thing together, just because it's multi-level. So many things involved.
Man, Rod, tremendous. Listen, man, we're starting to power down just a little bit, but I want to make sure that I allow you a little bit of time if there's anything else that you would like to promote or talk about. Now, in the show notes for this podcast, I'm definitely going to put your website in there, and then we'll talk a little bit offline also if there's anything else you want me to include in the show notes where people could get in touch with you. But you've obviously got the 20th anniversary of the Drum Set Musician that's getting ready to come out. Anything else you want to tell the people to visit or to check out that you might have coming up?
Well, let's say, funny, I'm flying out tomorrow to do a couple of shows with Winger. We are still an active band. Every year we do something, so every other year we do a lot of shows, and then every other year we don't, because Reb Beach is also the guitarist and band leader of Whitesnake. So this is a year where he'll be busy this summer with them. So we're just doing the shows this weekend, and then in the fall we will reconvene and do more things. Whether the Dixie Dregs, which just finished up a 36-show tour with the lineup of the band from the first commercially released album. It was the first time the five of us had been on stage in 40 years. It was one of the most exciting experiences for me of my career to do this. Steve Morse and I have been the only two members of the band that have played together in the different configurations of the Dixie Dregs since my meeting him in college in 1973 or 74. But the band hadn't done anything in 12 years or so. And like I said, this version of the band hadn't all been on stage since 1977 or so. So I'm not sure if there will ever be more Dixie Dregs. I'm hoping there may be. We'll see what the future holds. So you can sort of keep your eyes open for that. I'm going to be doing some recording with Jordan Rudess next month. He's got a bunch of new music together. That's more for his solo side of things. I think that's about it. My goal is to now really start understanding recording, so that I can start getting back to putting down a lot of my musical ideas and not have to rely on others to help me with it. I also, I've written some music that's been played on the cable show American Pickers. Other side to things, it's a lot of fun. You barely even hear the music because they bury it so deep. But it's a lot of fun writing and creating music that ultimately finds a home somewhere.
Man, tremendous. Now, Rod, before we let you go, before we stop recording, I'm not sure if you've heard any of our interviews, but we have a tradition that we do here on the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. And what we call it is the Drummers Weekly Groovecast Rorschach Test. And essentially what it is it's a series of 20 short answer questions. And it's just simple things. It could be anything related from drumming. It could be related to just general life principles. I could say, hey, what's your preference, Coke or Pepsi? And you would give your answer. So I would like to run you through the test. So whenever you're ready, we'll get started.
Sure, let's go.
Question number 1. Drum heads, clear or coated?
Coated.
When working on rudiments, play it on snare drum or play it on practice pad?
Practice pad.
What's your favorite beverage?
Coca-Cola.
How often these days do you play piano?
Twice a week.
Who is your favorite double bass drum player?
Wow, this is really hard. How do I answer? Wow. Virgil Donati.
Dogs or cats?
Cats.
In-ear monitors or wedges?
Wedges.
Old school. Floor tom preference, stand mounted or on legs?
Legs.
What is your favorite method book?
Method book. Page 38, syncopation.
All right, you and I can sing the first line together. Okay. Sports. Do you love them or hate them?
Love them.
Okay, follow-up question to that. New York teams or Boston teams?
New York.
All right, gotcha. How many drum sets do you currently own?
I think 7.
Do you still own that great double bass Rogers kit from back in the Dregs days, early Dregs?
No.
Oh, all right. Boston question. Scullers or Regatta Bar?
Regatta Bar.
Kick pedal tension preference. Steve Gadd floppy, pedestrian medium, or Billy Cobham tight?
Billy Cobham tight.
Taxi or Uber?
Uber.
When you're on the road, do you try to eat health food or is it just bring me more pizza?
Health food.
Double paradiddle or paradiddle diddle?
Paradiddle diddle.
What's your favorite TV show?
All in the Family.
Oh, Norman Lear. When you are reading a chart, do you prefer them just basics with underwritten notation, or do you like them overwritten?
Basics. Underwritten.
What's your favorite vacation spot?
Caribbean.
Final question. If you could take a lesson from anyone alive or dead, who would it be?
Joe Morello.
Ah, great. Rod, fantastic, man. Thank you very much for indulging us on the Rorschach test. You passed with flying colors, my friend.
Thanks, Phil. You know, I have to mention, you know, one of your first questions was clear heads are coated. My bass drum head is clear. All of the other heads are coated. But so
we won't hold that against you. Rod, listen, when you and I originally talked, I knew you had a little bit of a time crunch today because you're getting ready to go out on the road. But I don't know if you realize it. We've been going for almost an hour and 45 minutes, man. Thank you for allowing us to pirate your day.
My pleasure. It's really been nice chatting.
Likewise, Rod. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Big thanks to Rod Morgenstein for agreeing to be on the show. What a great guy. Just an unbelievable Hall of Fame player. Thanks again to Rod. As we mentioned close to the end of the show, make sure you check out the show notes that are included with every one of our episodes, including this one, so you can find out what Rod is up to. We're going to include links to his personal website, links to his social media, and then also don't forget to check out the 20th anniversary of his legendary book, The Drum Set Musician. Thanks, as always, for listening to the show. We greatly appreciate your listenership. We appreciate all your support. You can find us at drummersweeklygroovecast.com. There, at our website, you'll find every single one of our episodes for free, always for free. You'll find our videos. You'll find our social media information. You'll also be able to manage your subscription, and if you like, you can reach out to us. You can email us from our form that's on that website as well. We have brand new feature episodes that come out every Monday, with Accountability Thursday mini episodes every first and third Thursday of the month. Stay in touch with us. Please make sure that you let us know what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, what you would like to hear on the show. And as always, you can find us at iTunes, Google Play Podcasts, Stitcher, anywhere you find your favorite podcasts and music, you should be able to find us. If you can't find us, you're not looking hard enough. Reach out to us. We'll point you in the right direction. Also, we love it when you guys share the show with your friends. That's how we grow organically. We really appreciate all the support you give us. And if you would, the next time you are in iTunes, and I realize how easy it is to do from the phone in particular. There's just some little stars up there you can click. When you are in iTunes, please leave us a 5-star rating when you get a moment. It helps the show grow and helps other people who are looking for drumming podcasts find us, since we relate to other shows of the same ilk. As we leave you, you are hearing Rod Morgenstein underneath my inane ramblings. This track is one that we mentioned during the show. It's the first time I really became aware of Rod. It is from the Steve Morse Band album called The Introduction, and this is that tune called Cruise Missile. It's available on the Electra Musician label. That's the label that we love to talk about on this show. It's a very underrated label that has some tremendous recordings on it. So enjoy Rod Morgenstein with the Steve Morse Band, and we will see you next week.